Hello, everyone, and welcome to a bonus episode of Community by Design, exploring social infrastructure in the Waterloo region. My name is Danielle Deveau, and I am one of the producers here at Midtown Radio. To celebrate the release of the Community by Design podcast, Midtown Radio partnered with the Waterloo Region Community Foundation and the Kitchener Public Library to host a community conversation on January 22nd in the KPL Theatre. Over 120 community members braved the winter weather and joined us for a conversation about the importance of social infrastructure in the Waterloo region. I had the privilege of hosting this conversation and was joined by Jay Harrison, producer and host for Community by Design, Nathan Stretch, who is the Senior Manager of Community Development and Insights at the Kitchener Public Library, and Jeyas Balaskanthan, Executive Director at the Uptown Waterloo BIA. Here is a recording of the event, starting with an introduction from Eric Avner, President and CEO at the Waterloo Region Community Foundation. Thanks for listening.
Good evening. Good evening. Thanks for being here. For those who I haven't met yet, my name is Eric Avner. I'm the President and CEO of the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, and on behalf of all of us, and KPL and everybody else who's involved with this and Midtown Radio, wonderful to have you here to celebrate the launch of Community by Design, a podcast dedicated to exploring the systems, the spaces, the relationships that shape how we live together in Waterloo Region. At the Waterloo Region Community Foundation, we've been on a journey to understand not just what makes a community thrive, but how connection happens, how people meet, how they participate, how we build trust, how we feel at home. The work has grown only more important as the region's been growing and changing. It's been anyone who's been here realizes that we are one of the fastest growing and fastest changing regions in Canada. And with that growth and change has come a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of responsibility and challenges. Since last fall, when we released the 2025 Waterloo Region Vital Signs Report, a message has emerged pretty clearly. Belonging can't be left to chance. People across the region have told us they want more ways to connect with each other, to their neighborhoods, to community life. We want spaces that make it easy to show up, programs that feel more welcoming, systems that remove barriers to participation. So that's why social infrastructure, the shared spaces, the shared experiences, the shared platforms and resources that help people connect in meaningful ways has become such a central part of our work at WRCF. And it's why a podcast like Community by Design matters. It gives us all space to explore what connection looks like in practice, right here at home. If you've already listened to the first episode, and I'm sure everyone in this room has, which launched over the weekend, you'll know it focuses on one of our region's most powerful examples of social infrastructure, libraries. Far more than buildings with books, they're civic anchors. They're places where newcomers land, where young people build confidence, where community groups gather, and where people find support without having to ask for it. They show us what's possible when we invest in spaces that are free, accessible, and welcoming to all. And that's the spirit behind the podcast, to dive into the people, the ideas, the examples that illustrate what social infrastructure looks like in action. To highlight the places where it's working, the gaps we still need to address, and those opportunities ahead of us as our community continues to evolve. So in a moment, when I get out of the way, you're going to hear from a panel of leaders and practitioners who think about this every day. They bring deep experience with designing programs, shaping public spaces, and strengthening relationships in ways that help our region thrive. Their perspectives and the conversations you'll hear throughout the podcast series invite us to think differently about how we build community, how we prioritize connection as an essential part of our future. So as we start tonight's event, I encourage you to listen through the lens of what's possible. What would it look like if every neighborhood in Waterloo Region had the social infrastructure it needed to foster belonging? What would it look like if connection was treated as a core component of community development? And what role can each of us play in making that future real? So thank you for being here to celebrate the launch of Community by Design. Thank you for caring about our connection in our community. And thank you for helping to build an equitable, sustainable, connected Waterloo region where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and to belong. So let's get started. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eric. Good evening, everyone. My name is Danielle Deveau, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here to the official launch of our podcast, Community by Design, exploring social infrastructure in the Waterloo region. I'm the moderator for tonight, and I've been looking at the boards outside, and I love the conversation that we're going to have. I'm really looking forward to speaking to all of our panelists as well as to all of you. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. We recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and commit to working towards reconciliation. And I would encourage everyone tonight to bring this acknowledgement to our conversation. It's important to continue to ruminate on the role that social infrastructure might play in helping us realize some of our local commitments to truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples here on the Haldeman Tract. That land, that very clear, mapped out, no question about where the lines are, that land was promised to the Six Nations, and it was never given as promised. And so I think there are a lot of conversations that we need to keep front of mind as we work through thinking about social infrastructure and creating an equitable community. So, as I said, tonight marks the official launch of Community by Design, a podcast produced by Midtown Radio in partnership with Waterloo Region Community Foundation and the Kitchener Public Library. And the series explores the findings of the Community Foundation's 2025 Vital Signs Report, which really focused on social infrastructure, those physical spaces, organizations, and experiences that help us connect with one another. So, we're talking about social infrastructure, and there are so many places that we could go with this conversation. But maybe just to start out with the basics, what does social infrastructure mean for us? What does it look like in your work? What does it look like in practice? And so we'll start down at the end. Nathan Stretch, what is social infrastructure to you in your life?
In my life?
Or just in reality? I don't know.
Sure, in reality. I'm not sure that I'm best to comment on reality, but I'll give it a good shot. And I work here at Kitchener Public Library, and specifically I work out of this location. And this location, Central Library, has changed and evolved a lot since I first moved to Kitchener about 15 years ago. For the first 12 years I was here, I was working for the Working Center, which taught me a lot about social infrastructure and how to recognize it. Specifically, I think we're all excited about the reopening of Queen Street Commons Cafe in downtown Kitchener. And maybe for many of us, that was and is an enduring example of social infrastructure. And the library here in Kitchener was a place that grew into a spot that I thought that I could work. So as the building became animated and the people in the space started to show and welcome diverse people into the space, it came on my radar in a new way. And that may be the next evolution of the library's sense of itself or practice of social infrastructure in this city. But it was something that was very inspirational to me and continues to be inspirational.
Awesome. Jeyas.
For the BIAs, business improvement areas, social infrastructure, it's really important, right? Without the third space, without the gathering spaces, the economic development is not going to be there. So there's a lingering theory that a lot of the academics talk about, and it's about like the safety part of it. So I'll use Uptown as an example. You're on King Street between William and Willis Way. Ideally, you want to grab a book from Wordsworth Bookstore, grab some tarts from Sweet and Savory Pie, get a coffee from Pilot Coffee, and somewhere along the way there, hopefully there are tables and chairs that you're just hanging out, right? So when the first set of people hang out on a Sunday morning, more people stroll along, they see, okay, there must be something going on here. Safety, security, sense of belonging, right? And more people start to linger, and then it becomes that space that people want to go to without even having a second thought, right? You want to get up in the morning, you want to go to servant shows, then you want to walk up there, right? So with the BIAs, when you look at Uptown Waterloo BIA, we have the square space that in the Uptown Square, we do a lot of events. It's us, it's city. The BIA now has been working with a lot of community groups for them to come activate the space. So we are creating social infrastructure there with creating the sense of belonging. Everyone belongs here, right? This is a public space. Over the last 5 years now, we've been doing our night markets in the summertime with a library in Uptown Waterloo, the public library, and in the parking lot there. So that's two different sort of companies, groups working together to bring people together. That's social infrastructure for me, right? So it's a sense of belonging. It's people just feeling that they are welcome here, they belong here, and then you create that. From that community development with the help of social infrastructure, then the economic development happens automatically throughout.
And Jay, going into this project, you signed up to produce a podcast. Did you have a strong sense of what social infrastructure was going into it? And how did the conversations that you ended up participating in maybe change what you thought about social infrastructure?
I think I came into this project as someone who uses social infrastructure, someone who goes to the library and goes to the town squares. But I hadn't really thought about it terribly deeply. So working on this project was a great opportunity just to think about, a little bit differently about what those spaces mean in my life. And I shared this story in the beginning of the first episode about how I was pregnant at the beginning of the pandemic and what that isolation felt like for me. And then what it felt like as we started to meet some of our neighbors at the park in our neighborhood. And I had really not put too much thought into the role that the park played in that experience I had of recovering from the pandemic by meeting families with other small children. But this working on this project was a good opportunity to look at that. It was also just a really great excuse to talk to very passionate people in this community. I spoke with 15 people over the course of 5 episodes, and our reporter Karen Atkins spoke to additionally to a few folks who just happened to be out using the spaces. And definitely the conversations that I had with these folks influenced the way that I am thinking about social infrastructure now. So I will point out in particular, in episode 1, if you haven't heard it already, you're going to hear from Dr. Troy Glover from the University of Waterloo. And he does an excellent job of taking a somewhat abstract concept and making it very easy to understand. And he shared something that stuck with me in that episode, which is that we can consider lots of things social infrastructure that we might not otherwise, like sidewalks. And that was something that became very apparent during the pandemic when we were all using sidewalks as our meeting spaces. So that really stuck with me in how I think about social infrastructure. Second, I would say is in episode 3, our episode about schools, you're going to hear from Laura May Lindo, who folks may know as our former MPP for Kitchener Centre. She's also one of the foremost experts in our community on education. And she pointed out, it's really useful to have a term like social infrastructure to help us talk about something that is often so invisible, but also encouraged us to think about that language might not resonate with everyone, and that's okay, and to keep in mind that it's okay to have tensions and disagreements when we're talking about big concepts like this. And the last conversation that really sparked something for me in the way I was thinking about social infrastructure is in episode 5. You're going to hear from Sam Nabby, who is a local advocate, and he's here tonight somewhere. Sam, my conversation with Sam, I really got from that there's value in looking at the neighborhood scale when we talk about social infrastructure. We have some incredible infrastructure in our community, the ODD, KPL, the Uptown Waterloo Square. that bring people from all across the city and the region to collide with each other socially. But there's something incredibly important about what social infrastructure in a neighborhood can do to help build connection in a different way, and that is actually going to become really critical as we grow. So I would say so many great conversations, but those were three that really fundamentally shaped the way I am thinking about social infrastructure now.
Yeah, and actually this thinking about, the role of social infrastructure and how critical it is for the Waterloo region as we grow towards, someday reaching 1 million residents, and the idea that all 1 million residents can't just go to the same centralized pieces of social infrastructure, that we really do need to have a dispersed framework for having spaces where people can experience their communities and to solve problems like social isolation, like polarization, or like civic disengagement. And so I'm wondering, where, as the region is growing rapidly, what can social infrastructure and a focus on social infrastructure and investing in social infrastructure, or maybe thinking differently about social infrastructure, what can that do for us? And maybe from your experience at the library, which is one of the places where that investment happens, and it happens in neighborhoods.
Yeah, this is a good question. What can social infrastructure do for us as we grow? And there's something really important about bringing the concept of social infrastructure from the implicit way that we value it. Yeah, we like libraries and we like auditoriums and parks and these kind of things, but we don't always value them in the explicit way that I think that we should. And so when we get into community building or city building, when we're talking about dividing up funds, sometimes things that we implicitly value don't get the attention or the funding that they need during a really important process like this, or in a sense that we're looking towards the future and thinking about city building. So WRCF introducing this term in a very explicit way into our community, I think means that we start to figure out how do we have language around these things that we value that can be a bit ineffable. And what I've found when I've been talking to larger bodies or governments, talking to academic institutions, is that if your project or the thing that you value cannot be made explicit, then it will not be valued at the dollar and cents portion of the plan. So what can social infrastructure do for us? The concept can help rally us around the things that we love, that we need, that we cherish, and help push a community understanding of that forward into a very practical community building concept.
Well, and Jeyas, you are in one of our central locations with the Business Improvement Association, but there are many residential parts of the city that don't have any kind of concentration of commercial businesses. The way that our zoning happens, there's all these like massive stretches of residential that are food deserts and all of these things. What is the benefit to having more integration of concentrations of businesses interspersed in our city where you see that Uptown's a great place to live, and how could that happen in other parts of our community?
How many developers are in this room today? Like none, right? How many city regional commissioners, directors? I see my counselor, which is awesome. I appreciate Julie. She's a big advocate and helps me and helps the BIA. So that's a key, right? Like the folks in this room, we believe in this and we want to do this, right? And we live by it. We do it day to day. You look at Uptown Square as an example, or downtown Kitchener, the Carl Zaya Square, the accessibility, transportation accessibility, physical accessibility is there through transportation where people can get to, right? Danielle, when you're talking about suburbia, there are some cool places, whether Kitchener or Waterloo in the suburbia. Number one, if you're talking about social infrastructure, how are people going to get there? If it's going to take you an hour and a half to get to a hockey, a library, a gathering space, you're already wasting time. So how do we, as we go to that million people, how is that vision of when centralized things are already available, how do you build more social infrastructure around it? So if I use Uptown as an example, if a family comes, you hang out in the square, or you go to the library, you go to the park, right? I'll tell a story anecdotally. Someone this summer said, the pavilions are really busy. People are asking for more pavilions. I'm like, absolutely. And this human didn't understand. You could come talk to me afterwards. I could talk more about it, and Councillor Wright knows about it too. And they didn't understand. I said, think about all of the humans, all of the people who are coming into the region. They are living in 3-4 generational families are living in 1-2-bedroom apartments. They don't have the third space. So we need to build more pavilions. We need to create more spaces where people can get to, right? And social infrastructure plays into affordability, accessibility, right? It is really like it's deep. And sometimes the engineers or folks who make the decision, who don't come to these spaces, they don't really understand it. Right, that's one of the challenges for us. Right, one of my jobs is like I'm a salesperson. I got to sell all of these ideas to 3 different kinds of people: designers, engineers. Right. So when we have the support of the politicians, it's amazing. Then we are speaking the same language. We need to get there. Because there are some developers who are visionary, thoughtful. They want to create social infrastructure as part of their bill. Let them do it. Right? And if you go, even some examples, when you go behind Laurier in some of the developments they have, when you're talking about some of the developers have thoughtfully created the space, now who is going to activate it? Where's the funds coming from, right? So there are lots of challenges, lots of questions, so we need to work together. There's been questions, we've been reached by a bunch of people about trying to create different BIAs, and he said, our job, my job, still need to do. I'm 2 years into it. I'm still learning. We need to do a better job of creating more accessibility for people in Uptown. Then eventually we could think about it. So if there are champions and if there are politicians who can help, if there are developers and folks with money who could also invest, then we'll get there. So it's not a single person or single groups thing, and we all have to come to the table. So things like this is awesome. And the thing here is that there's not many decision makers here, right? We are all doers who are in this room, and we want to continue to do. So we need the decision makers and the financial people to help us to do more.
Jay, did you across the series? Did you feel like people were expressing anxiety about growth? Was there excitement about growth? Or were people just in their moment and couldn't even get to the point of imagining this like future state of 1 million people?
I think everyone we spoke with in the show is involved in community work in one way or another. So it's all front of mind for a lot of them. Know that this is coming. I didn't get a sense of anxiety. I did get a lot of sense of possibility. I think there was a very hopeful tone to discussions about a growing community. Particularly in our final episode, in episode 5, we talked a lot about what the possibilities could be with growth, and again, back to Sam's point that he makes so poignantly, is that this neighborhood scale really becomes critical for thinking about growth, and the hopeful tone was there for me in the conversations I had.
Mm-hmm. And, we think it's easy to think about how libraries embody, the ideal version of social infrastructure. I think that they are open, they're accessible, they are the embodiment of this notion of hubs, havens, and hangouts that were invoked in the Vital Signs report. They do all those things. So in theory, we can see it. In practice, what does KPL do intentionally to foster social connection beyond books and tables and the actual physical infrastructure that's here?
It's amazing that we just agree that libraries are good and they're here and they're going to be here forever, because it's actually a pretty aggressive mandate that libraries have to put quite a lot of time and energy into an organization that is not a part of the market, right? Or beside the market, right? So when you come into a library space, it is an unusual place in our society where you are not asked to buy anything, and you don't have to declare to anyone what you are doing there. You can ask the desk for help, or you can bypass the desk and staff completely. You are there to help participate in the space and animate the space together with us. And that's a very intentional concept of a library. When we think about the hopefulness of a growing city, we recently opened a new library in the southwest of Kitchener, and it's the first net zero municipal building in Waterloo Region. And it's pretty exciting. And we're going to build more libraries if the city expands. Our mandate is to have a library within 2.5 kilometers of every citizen in Kitchener, which is a pretty aggressive mandate. So we're already looking at what's next. We're looking at growth patterns, because wherever the city grows or densifies, we'll be there, trying to create an intentional hub that's not market-driven, that anyone can access at scale all the time. We see 1.2 million visits each year across just Kitchener Public Library locations in this city. And one of the very intentional things we do is just be open a lot, right? We'll be open till 9 o'clock tonight. We'll be open till 5 o'clock tomorrow, and we'll start it all over again. It seems really simple, but to animate a space for that many hours in that many locations all the time is quite a massive, intentional undertaking. And we want to do more. We want to be the city's living room. We want to be your neighborhood's living room.
Well, and I think like having more public spaces that are just open and there and can add that vibrancy, and Jeyas, you're talking about that sense of safety and security, knowing that there are just going to be other people on the street, other people wandering around. And I think about public spaces and the role of local businesses in creating that sense of community that people kind of need things to do, and that could be going into a shop, or it could be buying coffee, or it could just be browsing, or it could just be looking in windows. How do you, thinking about Uptown Waterloo, how is the business and then the coordination of the public spaces, how is that contributing to social infrastructure in terms of how it's improving our daily lives? And what are some of the creative approaches that you've seen that have worked really well in terms of animating what are just streets and sidewalks?
Yeah, one of the thing is over the last 2 years, when community groups have engaged, pretty much most of the time I've said yes and drove my team nuts. But to get things done, right? You say yes, and then we figure out a way to get things done. So activating the space on a regular basis, Danielle, is very important. So that's that concept of there's always something happening, you could walk up, right? And then intentionally programming things. When you think about Salsa in the Square in Uptown Waterloo, it's going into its 7th or 8th year, right? So every Thursday night you come up, it's free. That's an event. We are working with the business, Uptown business. We share some of the costs with them so they could activate it. And it's accessible and open to everybody. And when folks come in, you hope and you see that they are going they are getting a coffee, or they're going in, getting food or getting drinks, and they're hanging out and they want to come back. And then when they continue to come back, they've seen other businesses they want to go into. Right, so for the BIAs, community development and economic development go hand in hand through the social infrastructure spaces we already have available. Right, we did a project, the Heart, that's on King Street and William. That was a project that was a BIA and the city through some grants. if we could intentionally, purposefully create more spaces like that in the four corners of the BIA, so all of the neighbors, the neighborhood that's living there, going back to what you had mentioned about Sam Nabi's comments, then folks are going to think about walking up, riding a bike, rather than getting into the car and going to the mall. So that's where social infrastructure plays a big role for us, for the BIAs and for the downtown core areas everywhere you go. So we get to work together with community, with businesses, find the funding however we can, magical money tree, and make things happen. So folks are always coming, folks feel welcome, and feel safe. And going back to even the region now, we belong, right? That's a theme for the region and for the municipalities for that. So we have to be mindful of that in every way we are acting and investing and doing things.
I love this also, that social infrastructure is really just enabled by people who always say yes, no, even if they just are over capacity and don't have time to do another thing. An exciting project comes around and you're like, okay, yes, I will. It's actually on my 2026 bingo card, is to say no to an exciting new opportunity. But I do think beyond finding money to pay for it, it's that there are always these enthusiastic people who see a great idea or see a great thing you can do in the community and go for it and say yes to it, which is great. Don't start saying no. Jay, other kinds of social infrastructure that the interview guests across the series talked about, were there any things that surprised you, or you thought, oh, I had never really thought about that as social infrastructure, and yes, obviously that makes such a big impact in our community?
Yeah, I mean, right from the get-go, this was sort of a new idea for me. So we had to figure out, what types of social infrastructure were we going to focus on? Because, as you said, there are so many people in the community who say yes to everything. So we have lots of really cool spaces and organizations that we could have covered. So what we decided to focus on, we thought this was sort of going to be an introduction to the concept of social infrastructure. So we tried to pick examples that would be salient enough for people that they could say like, oh yeah, I've been to a library before. I understand how that's social infrastructure or a town square. So in episode 1, we looked at libraries, and we intentionally wanted to look at the rural and urban experiences of libraries. So we got to talk with Nathan here at KPL, as well as Christina McLaren, who is part of the Waterloo Region Libraries that serves the townships. And then in episode 2, we are looking at town squares, and that episode is coming out this weekend. And that's where we're talking to Jeyas about the Waterloo Town Square. And we're also talking to Scott Higgins and Sherry Roberts about the Gaslight District in Cambridge. And that's a really interesting episode where we're looking at the difference between public and private spaces and what that looks like and what that means for social infrastructure in our community. In episode 3, we're looking at schools, and it actually took me longer than it probably should have to consider schools as social infrastructure, because it's just something I take for granted, that it is there, that it is for education. But the more we looked at it, the more we realized how interesting it was as social infrastructure. And in this episode in particular, we wanted to highlight how marginalized groups are using schools to create havens, to build social capital. And it's, so some really interesting stories there about how schools are being used as social infrastructure. Episode 4, we looked at local media. And again, it was not immediate to me that local media was social infrastructure, because it's often doesn't come with a physical space. So in that episode, we are looking at the Air News as an example and looking at the story of Air News and what it means to that community as social infrastructure. And then in our final episode on neighborhoods, you're going to hear some beautiful, heartwarming stories from Fiddlesticks Community Center, which is in Cambridge, up on Cowan Boulevard. So just some beautiful stories about what that space means to that neighborhood, as well as our conversation with Sam about 1 million neighbors and how what it means to be growing as a community.
Well, and that idea of public spaces versus private spaces and sometimes public-private partnerships being really important for social infrastructure, are there specific partnerships or programs that Nathan or Jeyas you've seen at your respective places of work that you felt like were really interesting or really worked well?
Well, I mean, I am very passionate about music and music in the space. And I like the idea that we've had some really great partnerships that have brought out some fantastic musical moments in the library, partly because it's fun to play in that tension, like the library, shh, oh, we're gonna have a concert, it's gonna be loud, maybe we're gonna play in that a little bit, like, oh, we're doing something bad. We, as the library, we do a fair amount of music here all the time, so it's an imagined kind of historical tension, but it's still a good tension to work inside of. So when we've had partnerships with local community members, as well as with educational institutions and entertainment institutions, particularly to bring Black music to the library, those have resulted in some really amazing moments for community, things that people can remember, to look back on. When we first did a concert in the library post-pandemic, we had Havaya Mighty come into the space, and Havaya Mighty was raw and uncensored, and I know we don't think about libraries that way, but libraries are uncensored spaces. And Havaya put a poignant kind of dot on the eye of libraries in that moment, and it became a callback moment for lots of people, so that when they came back into the space in the future, during regular library hours, they could say, this is a space that I recognize from the concept of a library that we're familiar with. Right? It's pretty quiet. I can get a book, I can do these things, but this is also a place with a layered experience of radical community building that also kind of left like a taste in the space. And all of a sudden you have a complex and layered understanding of an organization that maybe has held a really kind of strong social norm for you for a long, long time. I often think about the scene in Ghostbusters when there's a ghost in the library, and that whole scene works because of the tension between this ghost and what are they going to do, and the Ghostbusters are there and they want to take care of the ghost, but they kind of want to take care of it quietly because libraries are quiet, severe places, and then boom, ectoplasm everywhere, and we all think, oh, what a amazing and hilarious and kind of stressful moment in the movie, because libraries are not supposed to be like that. And sometimes when I think about this library, I think about the ghost in the library and the ectoplasm kind of spraying all over the books, and think like, that's kind of an experience of a library too, isn't it? Just one from the movies.
That's the scariest part of any Ghostbusters movie, is that I had to hide under the coffee table as a child, and that scene. She's scary. Jeyas, public-private partners or other partnerships just in general that you saw have worked well?
Yeah, this past summer, working with KW Famous and working with the city and the region, the parkade, 6-story parkade, we were able to take over it during Victoria Day weekend and activate it, right? So you talk about that parking spot sits freaking empty. So it was great to finally, it was about a couple of years to sort of navigate and figure out, but to be able to activate that. And people were amazed, right? And over the weekend, we had over 4,000 people come through. People were like, look at the parking space, it's fully activated, right? So if you could continue to activate spaces like that, and that could help creating some social infrastructure, right? So that's us. We got to give kudos to KW Famous, Robin and her team, who took the lead and activated that space. The other thing, going back to that whole lingering concept, and I was talking with Eric this morning, and there's so many theories, right? That safety, that sense of belonging that creates. So the BIA, over the last couple of years, we've been working closely with the city in looking at how the patio permits are sort of categorized, right? Like, if you're not selling alcohol, you don't like let the businesses put tables and chairs out. And going back to what I said initially, right? You want people to grab something from here, get something from there, sit there, relax, spend a couple of hours, and others see it. Then people start hanging out, right? So for us, for the BIAs, it's navigating to find in policies and procedures and bylaws and how to make things easier for our members, so we can help create that social infrastructure on one side. The other side is partnerships and public-private partnerships and bringing organizations in to activate the spaces. So that's continuing to create social infrastructure.
Yeah, taking over parking garages. Years ago at night shift, I saw an opera performed in the now of heritage significance green parking garage. So I think, like all these great moments in unexpected and often passed over spaces where you wouldn't linger ordinarily. So, I mean, from that uplifting note, let's turn to maybe some of the more challenging thoughts on social infrastructure, and that is the reality that not everyone experiences social infrastructure equally. That we don't necessarily have equitable access across our community, across urban and rural communities for newcomers and marginalized groups, for seniors or people with accessibility needs. Like, not all spaces are equally accessible and equally welcoming to all people. And this is a challenge for social infrastructure, and that something could be social infrastructure for me and just not be social infrastructure for someone else because it isn't accessible. Maybe we'll start with Jay for this one. Like, what were some of the major concerns or perspectives on equity that you heard during your interviews?
So this was something that came up in many of the episodes. It was definitely something we focused on when we talked about town squares. But the stories that came out of the schools episode were really interesting. So again, this is episode 3. We're talking to students and parents who are using schools, the infrastructure of schools, to build social capital for groups that are marginalized. So hearing about how Black student associations emerged in our community over the last several years, talking to Quinn Palmer, a student leader at WCI, about the GSA there and the significance of that space to students there and their well-being. And a really cool little project at King Edward Public School in Kitchener, primary school, parent-led project to bring together parents whose first language is not English and connect them with one another. To me, those were just really, really fascinating stories about how social infrastructure can be leveraged for moving towards greater equity. But the story about equity and social infrastructure, I think also housing is obviously a very important part of that. And Jeyas said this when we were talking, that as we build up, we need spaces for people to congregate because, like you pointed out, people don't have the space in these units to come together. But the other interesting piece around housing that's critical to the story of social infrastructure is that development charges are often what fund a lot of our municipal social infrastructure. And those are fees that developers pay to build. And under this accelerated development cycle that we're in right now, sometimes city councils are making decisions about reducing or waiving those charges, which results in less resources for new social infrastructure. I think in episode 1, Troy, who I notice is here, hi Troy, framed this really well as an environmental justice issue. Not every neighborhood has access to the same amount or type of social infrastructure. And in episode 5, you're going to hear Sam Nabby talk about an interesting solution to that, which is a tool that's come out of the 1 Million Neighbors Project, which is an interactive map where you can actually look in at a neighborhood level and see how relative to one another, what type of access different neighborhoods have to different types of social infrastructure. Yeah, so those were some of the pieces that stuck out to me. Yeah.
Well, and Jeyas, I think about, our uptown and our downtown is having to balance the needs of a really large diversity of people. And for one person to feel safe in the space can sometimes mean that there's an expectation that others are excluded from the space. And how do we balance the needs of trying to make our spaces equitable and open and still feel safe to everyone?
Yeah, that's a good question, tough question. And it is by fear creates that sort of whatever you want to call isms and people being scared because they don't know. So my belief is that the public spaces can create the space for people to learn about other cultures, right? So if you put an event in here closed where there's only access for 200 people versus if the event's in the Carlsbad Square, 2,000 people can see that, right? Not this particular, I'm just talking about in general big events, right? Right, let's go for it, right? Like so, and then folks see it, people see it, and they go, I saw this. Oh, that helped me answer the question. So that's a place the public squares can create, right? So for that, going back to equity, diversity, new immigrants, and community, folks don't know, right? Like access to policies, procedures, bylaws, how to go through and put in an application form to access for an event. That's where the libraries and the BIAs can play the middleman role of helping people, and that I believe that's our role to make sure they have that access, right? Like in my 2 years, I've literally had some of the groups said, nobody could help me. I went to Danielle, she sent me to Jay sent me to Nathan said, bring me $5,000 and then I'm here, right? So it's like, so how do we, listen to them. So what do you want to do, right? What's the event? What's the purpose of it? Okay, it's going to be great. It's community-led, and let's do it. And is it helping fill out the form? Is it finding security? Is it creating the safety protocol? Is it the middleman you are with the city and the community? So that's where the associations like BIAs, right? Like you go back to talking about hubs, hangouts, and havens. I've been sort of helping and being involved in preferably very far away for Adventure for Change. That's in the Northfield by Laurelwood community there, right? So the importance of that space, because of the social housing, because of the new immigrants, because of marginalized people, it's very impactful, right? What Olution is the executive director for Adventure for Change, kicking ass, doing an amazing job. So you need those. And that space, again, there's accessibility, right? Like you have to think in so many different ways. Some of the cultural events, they happen in great spaces, but they are in suburbia, in closed environment where folks are not exposed to it. If you're able to make those happen in public areas where other folks, other cultural people get to see it, they'll have questions and the fear goes away. They're like, oh, we're all same at the end of the day, right? So yeah, that's where BAAs and the public spaces can come into a good place.
Well, and Nathan, I think about what libraries have had to do in communities has changed a lot over the past decade, 2 decades. I mean, the library today is a pretty different place from the library that maybe we went to when we were kids. And also the library, because it is open a lot, ends up taking on the pressure when we don't have other kinds of social infrastructure elsewhere, that the library might become a warming center or a cooling center when we don't have other facilities in the community. So how do you see the challenges that libraries face and how much libraries have had to change and grow with our communities in terms of continuing to be a vibrant, accessible, safe, important central space.
I feel like that's a very generous rephrasing of the initial question, and thank you. And I just want to point out that this library, like I've been working here for 5 years, but this library, this library system has been here for 140 years. Like it's a really, 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 it's a really old institution, and a theory of change for libraries right now is kind of a rapidly increasing theory of change. Pace of change has come to our communities and has accelerated in libraries as well, which are often microcosms of our communities, of our neighborhoods. And I would like to point out that working with accelerated challenges in this library is no different than what other libraries across Canada and North America are also experiencing. And in moments like this, it's good to be part of a network, even though we're not, say, like officially federally funded. Like there's no funding from the feds to suggest that all of the libraries are a single network. We do act as a network together. And being part of a network like that gives some perspective as well. And one of the things that I've come to know and to note about our library is that we're exceptionally lucky to be co-located with so many strong support services, particularly in downtown Kitchener, so that while we feel the increased pressures of homelessness or people who are increasingly mentally ill, people who are experiencing injury or brain injury or infection, and people who are experiencing the compounding effects of all those things happening at once, we're not alone. So we're open a lot, but our community partners are open a lot too. And sometimes we need help. Sometimes we are able to say, hey, we're seeing something different happen in the library, and it's happening rapidly. Where can we go to get information, expertise, or support in order to meet those needs in a way that is ethical, in a way that is sustainable, and frankly, that is within the realm of our responsibility to do our part in this community, just like everybody else does our part in this community. And I think it's fair to note that over 140 years of an organization, not everyone has always felt welcome in libraries. And while libraries are strong rhetorical places, that rhetoric outside of action is just that, rhetorical. So if we make changes, policy changes internally, or if we decide that we are going to respond to a community need, we need to put that into action rapidly. And I often think about the library as like the opposite of a factory, in the sense that we can't stop and retool. We need to retool on the fly. And that comes with challenges. But I've been very impressed by my colleagues at the library to say we recognize that this is hard, and sometimes these challenges feel overwhelming, but we're still here, and we're going to do our best, and we're going to be introspective, and we're going to put resources into this, and we're going to expand the circle of support to include other organizations within our sphere to meet the complex needs of our very real community, not some other abstracted understanding of what Kitchener is, but of the people who are actually coming in the front door.
Well, and I know people want to ask us questions, and we are only a couple minutes away from letting you do that. But just quickly from our panel, crystal ball time. Social infrastructure fills gaps. 5 to 10 years from now, what social infrastructure do we need developed in our organizations, in our neighborhoods, in our communities? Or what are you seeing as places that we need to continue to invest in social infrastructure and build it up and grow? And we'll go back to Nathan.
Oh, well, I'm going to say we need libraries. We need a library within every 2.5 kilometers of people who are living in Kitchener. And I really agree. Thanks for that applause. One person in the front row here. But a library can look like a lot of different things, and libraries can be responsive to the neighborhoods that they are built in. They don't need to be. We don't want to come in and say, yeah, we're going to put a library in here. I'm not listening to you. We're going to build the library that we thought we were going to build. We need to be working with neighbors and with land rights holders and within the reality of a rapidly changing city and environment. I said this. I feel like you're going to listen to the podcast, and you're going to hear this again. We need to arrive on time, in a way that is responsible and responsive to our communities, and in a way that we are co-creating and creating sustainable spaces that really do good and do good in a good way. Those things are related but not the same. And creating a space, like we're very bricks and mortar based, like we're going to build buildings because the books need to go in the buildings. You can't leave them out in the rain. And then activating those spaces need to be working in a very integrated way. And building something takes a long time. And again, we're going to build. And it can be very challenging to continue to integrate new information within your project so that you meet the needs of the community when you arrive there together.
Jeyas, what's the thing that we need? You got 2 minutes. Just start listing things.
Lots. Do we have time? Libraries. Just when you think about public square spaces, when you have BIAs and the cities working together, create the space, create the resources, not necessarily financial, other resources, so people can activate the space. So find a way to say yes and make it happen. And when you think about Waterloo and Uptown Waterloo, the city of Waterloo is going through a new vision, another vision project for the park, and there's an opportunity. There's a lot of talk about creating a space, creating an amphitheater, and Councillor Wright knows this, and we need that amphitheater, whether it's 5,000 or 10,000 person space, because it's closer to Uptown. It has the transportation accessibility, which is number one. People can get there. It's in the center, and then everything can go from there. So,
great, Jay.
Yeah, I think I can't emphasize enough the neighborhood scale piece. I found that really fascinating, and I think one of the things I think is important in keeping that in mind as we're building social infrastructure and as we're growing is how important a lot of social infrastructure is for people who are outside of the market, for example, young people. And neighborhood scale infrastructure is literally at the scale of youth. And there's a multi-generational project that we get to engage in when we're building neighborhood scale social infrastructure. So when you'll get to listen to episode 5 on Valentine's Day. Snuggle up with your boo and listen to this episode about neighborhoods. And listen to the stories of the multi-generational stories at Fiddlesticks Community Center are just incredible to see how that space is building community in a time scale that is befitting a city. The other thing I would point to is local media. I was very surprised by the importance of local media as social infrastructure, which is embarrassing to say as someone who is involved in a local radio station. But I really had not thought too deeply about what it is that we do in terms of connecting a community. I think tonight is a very excellent example of how we have combined the infrastructure of a radio station and the infrastructure of a library to bring a group of people into a conversation. For that episode, we spoke with Mirko Petricevic, who is a veteran reporter from The Record. He's retired now and is an advocate for local media. And he had this salient message that really, really stuck with me, which is we need to stop treating local media as if it is a commodity to purchase and think about it as a community resource. And that fundamentally reshapes the way I think about my relationship to local media. Maybe it will do the same for you. So I would highly recommend thinking about that as you're listening to that episode. And the last one I will say is how important schools will continue to be. They are the lifeblood of a community in a lot of ways, and they are the welcoming committee for so many people who are new to the community. And as our community continues to grow, and particularly to grow through people moving to our community, schools become ever more important as sort of landing spots for people who are new to the community and new to neighborhoods. And so I absolutely love this parent-led language support program at King Edward Public School. It's such a wicked little program. And it would be very cool to see conversations about social infrastructure look to spaces like that and connect community development work with what schools are doing and sort of bridge connections there. I think would be fabulous to see.
To learn more about the podcast, check out midtownradio.ca. Thanks for listening.